And I
And my
think
audio issues are nowhere near as bad as.
nope, your video's a little laggy, but your audio sounds sweet, 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 Mr. Joe. Uh, and welcome everyone to our first spoiler room of 2023 on January 10th. We're recording this, and that just happens to be a coincidence again as we're launching our 10th year doing this podcast that I didn't think I'd get past like a dozen. I was like, yeah, we'll see what happens. And here we are. Uh, we're kicking off a new year and a new month. We're still rolling with the theme month. Blame Mr. Ian Simmons. No, and this month is e-ticket. Yes, e-ticket. January, we are looking at train themed films. And man, do we got one for you today. And do I have a crew with me tonight to talk about the classic 1974 version of Murder on the Orient Express. First, yes, he is back with us once again. Mr. Joe Randazzo is with us. Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Hey guys, how are you?
Glad to
Great.
have you. Glad to have you back. Always fun, even if you're south of the border. Well, Ian's south of the border too. I'm
It's Illinois, Mark.
I know. Hey, to
It's
me,
not
it's south of
Cancun.
the border, right? You're below the I-94, so there you go.
I get that reference. Call me Chris Evans.
There you go. And with us as well is none other than the right-hand man and the guy who just keeps coming back for more, Mr. Ian Simmons. Hello, Ian. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to talk about this movie because, wow. Anyway,
Now, I will say that my wife, she gave me a couple of comments that I'm going to interject here into the film because she watched it with me because she loves Poirot. She loves Poirot. She's got the box set of the BBC series in that of Poirot. She's watched them all. She knows the Agatha Christie books. She's read most of them and all that. So I was sitting next to her while watching this, and that was fun. So today, Joe, would you like to try to give the synopsis of Murder on the Orient Express?
Well, Hercule Poirot is sitting in in a little lounge area when Martin Balsam walks up to him and recognizes his old friend and invites him to. I think Poirot's going back to London,
Mm-hmm.
and Balsam is the owner of the train line. Manages to finagle getting Poirot into a packed, full train where there's this great cast of characters. I mean, literally a great cast, like some of the greatest stars in cinema history. Between like Lauren Bacall and Ingrid Bergman, and then like newer people at the time like Sean Connery and Michael York. Um, and lo and behold, Richard Widmark, who tells Poirot that he's being threatened, he gets murdered. Just as the train is about to hit a snowbank, so now Poirot's got to solve the mystery of who killed Richard Widmark, and he starts questioning everyone on the train, starts piecing together all the events of that night. I guess that's the quick synopsis because I know we're going to get into everything else uh, in detail in an hour or so. So I tried to leave that as like quick and painless as possible. Richard Widmark is murdered. Who killed him? And there's this great cast of Hollywood legends that are here to kind of act out the whole scenario.
New and old in main parts and in little parts. It's like
Well, you
amazing who is in this film.
well, you can kind of see like the fingerprints here of what would become movies like Glass Onion, which just came out like 2 weeks
Mhm.
ago on Netflix. So you kind of
Right.
see the beginnings of that.
Yeah, I mean the murder mystery as an ensemble cast isn't exactly new, but I think this was probably the biggest because you did have what is it, 12 Little Indians before this that came out. I think that was before this. Uh as well, which was the murder mystery film with an ensemble cast, but not quite, I think, on this scale. Ian,
No, not on this.
yeah, Ian, your initial thoughts with Murder on the Orient Express?
This was my first experience with this story. I didn't see the 2017 version with Kenneth Branagh. I'd never read the Agatha Christie novel. All I knew is that it was about a bunch of like rich people on a train and someone gets murdered and they're all suspects and this Poirot guy is investigating. I thought Albert Finney was at times, well, always freakish with his kind of hunchback, his Salvador Dali mustache, and much like Anthony Perkins and I think Michael York and a couple other actors in the film, they had way too much of like the white powder makeup applied to them. They looked dead, and it just kind of freaked me out. But I guess let me just
Particularly
put this
the
to
old
group.
Countess.
Yeah, the old Countess.
Now the old Countess. It's possibly because I watched the movie within the last several months, but she looked and sounded like Gary Oldman as old Dracula in the Francis Ford Coppola movie.
She did. She totally did.
Couldn't let that go. My question to you guys, have you seen the other versions of this story that have been on film?
I did not see the what is it, Alfred Molina version where he plays Poirot. I have not seen that version, but I did see the Kenneth Branagh parkour Poirot Poirot version. That's what my wife and I call him, is parkour Poirot.
I've seen the Branagh version as well. I made the mistake of watching this one the night before I went to see the Branagh one in the theater. So I was kind of, I think I might have kind of spoiled the Branagh version for myself because while I like it, I've only seen it once. I've never watched it a second time. I liked it, but I thought it paled in comparison to this one. My issue with the Branagh version is that it felt like there was maybe like studio meddling or something, because it felt like it was kind of cut down for time. Because here you see the process of how Poirot goes into everything. I felt like leaving the theater, watching the Branagh version. I felt like he kind of came to conclusions too quickly and too easily without any real investigative work. And my roommate who had seen it with me said he kind of felt like the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock, where you just kind of see the processes working, and I was like, it didn't really work. That aspect of it didn't work for me on the remake.
See,
I've never seen
the reason I asked is because because this movie's been remade a couple of times. I understand movies get remade all the time, but the big kind of twist at the end of like who killed this guy, and it turns out it's, spoiler alert, everybody pretty much. I just wonder if that angle was preserved through the subsequent tellings, and also if the fact that they all kind of get away with it was also preserved. Because I had like major problems with the way this story was resolved and the way Sidney Lumet chose to end his movie. But yeah, were those two elements kind of preserved in from what you guys know of the remakes?
With the remake, I believe so. Yeah,
I think so too. I don't remember it specifically.
I think they took a slightly different approach, but it was basically the same thing.
I remember this movie more than I remember the more recent one that I saw in the theater. I think it was preserved. I don't remember. Wow, that's an indictment on it.
Well, and the thing is, I also thought of the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock, a show that I think I only watched like 2 episodes of because I hated it. I hated it because I love Benedict Cumberbatch. I love Martin Freeman as actors, but I couldn't stand the writing. And again, I've read very little, Arthur Conan Doyle stories of Sherlock Holmes, but it just felt like, and I got the same vibe from Poirot in this movie, and that could go back to the source material. I don't know who to lay the blame at, but it just felt like this was a guy who was good at piecing things together, but also had an encyclopedic mind that just kind of defied everything. And it's almost like having a magic wand at some point that, you can solve all your problems by blasting a magic portal. He did the same kind of thing with logic. It's like, oh well,
Well,
you know, this person. It's clear from the fingerprints on the glass that, you know, 5 days ago he was in a Parisian shopping center and he bought this vest that was made in, you know, Belgium by an Asian factory worker whose parents' lineage dated back to 1642, and that proves that they did this. I'm like, no, just stop.
Poirot has always been like that. That's what makes him the world famous detective.
I get it,
Is his
but like,
deduction skills.
there's a difference between an audience member piecing together clues and figuring out along with the detective, and the detective having, like, you know, god level, like god mode powers of deduction that literally nobody on earth could figure out. Especially, like, I'll give you one, but not 15.
Well, Poirot, in the BBC one, of course, it's a little bit drier, and
Drier than this.
a lot of shows are a lot of the shows in that of the ones I've watched. I haven't watched them all. He is like that. He's not quite as amped up as he is in here. As my wife put it, there's a number of things in his behavior in this one that aren't Poirot, normal Poirot. Like he's supposed to be, if I remember her mentioning correctly, he's supposed to be OCD. He's supposed to, he does have that, where, the germ thing and everything. He's got that whole thing going on. He's usually very proper and rather stiff. And that's why my wife got triggered during the menu scene when when Poirot's old friend shows up, and Martin Balsam shows up, and he's like, "Oh, this menu is horrible," and he ripped it and he threw it, and my wife she's just like, "No, no, 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 no." She oh, we lost Joe there for a minute. Hopefully he'll be back.
Did we offend him with our
We
My
may have
stuff was going really, really, like you guys were just completely cracking up and breaking up again. So I was
sorry.
Sorry.
It's not you guys, because when I switched to my phone, I'm fine. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But yeah, my wife she got triggered when because she's such a Poirot fan that she's just like, yeah, no, he would not do that. And there are a few other things as well that they took liberties with his character that aren't actually him. And I think part of that too is the deduction in the shows in that they set it up a little bit more logically where you could see where he could possibly come up with it. Whereas in here, he does pull it really out of his ass at some points in this film. Like you're like, no, wait, what? Even though they do your standard summary, of who did it.
The climax of this film is 35 minutes long.
It is.
It's 35 minutes of him explaining everything.
Yeah.
Right. And like the problem is, by the time he gets to the third person and explaining how they're all like linked, how these three people are linked to the Armstrong kid, I'm like, oh, so they all killed him. Like, I know it's supposed to be like this big revelation, like you're supposed to get strung along, like, oh my God, I can't believe. Yeah, they're all in on it. Which leaves like my big tension was, and again, I hadn't read the book or seen any of the other adaptations. I was like, so how the hell are Poirot and Martin Balsam going to get off this train alive? Because they could my tension was, are they all going to gang up on them and try and attack them? There's going to be a big fight. But
No.
and we can probably save this towards the end because this really is the very end of the movie. But I was like, that's a bullshit ending.
Didn't like the ending, huh?
I didn't like the ending. Would be one thing if the
Yeah.
cheery zippity doo-dah music and the luscious train pulling through the snow, like, hey, it's a triumphant, isn't everybody happy? I'm like, no, we need to pull over and have a conversation, Mr. Poirot.
Well, he does say he has to go check his conscience now.
Oh, that makes it all better. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the issue that you're going to run into with stuff like this is how many, I guess, Mark, well, maybe your wife would know this, but how many pages is the novel versus this 2 hour and 10 minute movie? and also the BBC adaptations. How long were those? Were those like?
Well, they were after,
Yeah, they
and
were
you know,
definitely.
some of them were shorter books than others that Agatha Christie wrote, but a lot of the movies in that were, I would say, you know, either episodes or movies were like maybe, you know, an hour long or 90 minutes or so in between there. A lot of them. I can't speak for sure on all of it, but I know like some of the movies in that they were about that long. Because I mean, the BBC when they show stuff, we're so used to our long form shows. A regular show here of an hour is considered a double episode, you know, or 90 minutes is like a double episode. So, you know, it's hard to say. Like I said, I haven't watched all of them. Some of them are vary in length depending on the story. Um, but as far as this one goes for the page count, according to Google, it's 256 pages is the
That
book.
would be that's to turn that into a film. That's why Sidney Lumet at one point I think just went out. Wait, if I keep going at this pace, this movie's going to be 15 hours long. Let's
Well,
just get them
to
all together.
clarify,
We'll do the Charlie Chan ending. Just get everybody together in one room, and he just goes over it.
well,
But
to
the problem,
clarify, I'm pretty sure that 200 of those 256 pages are Poirot explaining the murder.
See, that's the thing. That's the, you know, if you watch this, if you hadn't seen a lot of murder mysteries before, and a lot of people have seen Glass Onion and that, and kind of rolled back and looked at some others, but this is why I love Clue, and why Clue for me is one of my favorite films of all time. Not just because it's a great comedy, but if you look at the parody of what they do for that movie, like the last third act is literally Tim Curry's character, the butler, describing the whole thing, much like, I mean, that's the standard kind of formula that these shows came in that I think were based off the books. I haven't read the books, as I mentioned, my wife has, but you know, that's kind of the thing is how did the master detective piece it all together? Whereas the audience, 9 times out of 10, is not intended to really know. You're there to let the detective tell you.
yeah, you're not there to figure it out yourself at all.
No.
Which, especially if you watch like the older like 1930s stuff, like the Mr. Motos and the Charlie Chans, and they don't. If you ever went back and looked at those again with an eye for the details and the clues, none of it would make sense because none of it ever intended to. Nobody ever expected you to, especially in the 30s. They didn't expect you to go back next week and watch the movie again to see if you could figure it out. Basically, the detective would just pull whatever happened out of his ass. And that's. I'm
And
sure if I read the novel would have everything explained down to a T a lot better. The clues would be there. But yeah, the movies aren't meant for the same people who read the novels. They're meant for people who are just going to be there to take in 2 hours of entertainment. And that's really it.
Hey, you know, I've been thinking about this this idea because I've started reading Christine by Stephen King because I'm going to be doing a page to screen of that in a few weeks. And I remember the John Carpenter movie, but the book is I'm like 200 some pages in. It's very different, the novel from the film. And I was thinking about that very thing, like what you'd have to turn this into a Netflix series in order to adapt the book. So I guess Carpenter and company did the best that they could to turn it into something marketable, but it is kind of a shame. Like I love reading books, I love watching movies. I don't like having to think that I'm going to a movie to see the dumbed down, to use Scorsese's line, theme park version of a great story.
Well,
But unfortunately, I feel like that's the case here. Like when they start doing the flashbacks to the actual murder going on, you know, the setup of it, I was thinking, okay, so they rigged everything so that they would have the guy knocked out at 1:15 in the morning, and it would look like that's when he died. But then they waited for Poirot to be sufficiently unconscious, rocked to sleep by the train and also the lateness of the hour, so that in the cabin right next to him, 12 people could go in and start stabbing this guy while giving these little mini eulogies to why they hated his guts, I'm like, okay, he slept through all that?
Sure. He's a sound sleeper and he snores. So, and he has that mustache protector for his mustache, which I didn't realize was a thing until I saw him put his mustache protector on for going to sleep.
God,
those walls are not that thick. Because there are other instances of things like rattling around and things knocking about, like, oh, what was that? Like a door open in the hall.
He wasn't in a dead sleep, so
yeah, sure. They need to establish that stuff. Like, oh, I'm a heavy sleeper. That doesn't cut it. I need an establishing scene of him sleeping through something else like crazy. And you're like, I can't believe you didn't wake up through that. Well, then maybe that would be an incentive for the people to do that. All the killing later, because as I'm watching this, like, there is someone on the other side of this not that thick wall. Like, there's people coming in and out of the car, like in the hallway, and like bumping into each other and like talking. Like, no, you can hear a party going on in the next room.
Quiet. They were still fairly quiet. I mean, you could hear bumps from the other room, but you can't necessarily hear
you can hear
dialogue.
You probably hear voices. They
were talking very quietly, so. And
they weren't talking
very loud.
They were not whispering. they were not like, this is why I'm stabbing you. It was like, this is for my daughter. Blah, 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 blah.
Because the audio equipment wasn't that good back then. They couldn't whisper. You wouldn't pick them up. So you just have to kind of give that
it's called acting. No, I don't buy it. This movie, like, I liked elements of it. I liked the setup. I liked Albert Finney's performance because Poirot is such a strange, I mean, the way that you describe him, how he is in the book, I can see, because he's a very uncomfortable, awkward guy being around these, devious kind of cunning, elite, right? He just doesn't fit in, even though he's a world famous, well-traveled detective. I like that aspect of it, which kind of makes his decision at the very end all the more like puzzling. Like, why would he help cover up for these people?
I think it's the sympathy, because the reason they killed him is because he killed a little girl. I think that's probably more why. I think that.
Yeah, they set it up. They set it up early because the film opens with this montage of the Armstrong case and a kid being killed, and then they also established during the film the tragedy of the rest of the Armstrong family. Someone depressed gets suicide, they die. The other one, I mean, so I mean, at least they do their best to try to set it up so that you're kind of like, yeah, okay. I don't quite like it, but this guy ordered the death of a kid. This guy, it was like a really, really nasty individual. So I can see their justification.
Well, but here's the thing. I think if you're going to do that, you need to set up the guy who's the murder victim, who is also the monster, as more of a monster. Because Ratchet in this movie, he comes across as just kind of a corrupt businessman. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's ordering kidnappings and hits on people. He's like this international thug.
Well,
that's not no, that's called bad writing. Because there's nothing. No, it's not in the acting, because it's not in the writing. Like, there's no clue in this performance. If none of that other information had come out about this guy, like, we wouldn't have any. They could be making up all of this stuff about his connection to it. They could just be, he might not have been connected to this Armstrong case at all. Maybe they fooled Poirot. They were certainly toasting and happy and smiling about it at the end of this picture in order to feel like they pulled one over on him.
That's the thing that got me, is I'm like, I don't feel like there was sufficient enough evidence to prove that this was the guy who killed the little girl, though. That's the only part where I had it. Wait a second.
Evidence or performance?
Quickly. You just saw a little piece of a burnt piece of paper that could be made out to be Daisy Armstrong, because it said like ISY space ARM. Just because you write a murder victim's name doesn't mean you killed them. That's
well, right. And that's also why we have things like a court of law, because if you boil it down, this was all like 12 people got away with killing someone that they didn't like, that they had a personal vendetta against. Yeah, what he was accused of doing was horrific and had these ripple effects, but who is he to let these people off? Like, why even be a detective who solves murders if you're just going to selectively let the people off the hook? If you're going to
Because
do
it
that,
made
let's
things
explore that.
because they're all foreigners in a foreign land, and he just wanted to keep it simple for the law enforcement. He said why,
That's
So
not a good reason at all.
see, I didn't.
I mean, also, what authority does he have?
Right.
What authority does he have in this area where the train is stuck?
He's
not police.
he's the world famous detective. His authority is everywhere. We've got Infobob in the audience dropping some Infobobs. He said he thinks Sir John Gillard showed up on Cannon's adaptation of Christie's Appointment with Death in 1988. And Balsam was in a couple Cannon releases, Death Wish 3 and Delta Force, which he was, yes. And Lauren Bacall was also in Appointment with Death. And then he also, well, go ahead.
What I was going to say is, if you look over the cast of this film, most of them are Hitchcock regulars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was also an episode of Mystery on PBS where David Such played Poirot, and the Orient Express was among the tales. And then he mentioned, which I love too, because as much as you guys may have problems with the Poirot and the way the main story plays out, I love lots of parts of this film quite a bit, and I found it at the end at least entertaining. And this was one of them where Perkins asked Gilgood if the book he was reading was about sex, and Gilgood responds deadpan and says it's about 2:00. I mean, there's a lot of witty dialogue in here. I think
Perkins was the Italian guy.
It was the Italian guy. Yeah, it wasn't Perkins. It was the Italian guy.
Sex? No, it's about 10:30. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was.
That was very much that like Gilgood in this movie. I felt like it was, oh my gosh, Hobson, the butler from Arthur. I thought this was like him prepping for that role. Like that one classic line from Arthur. He says, "Hobson, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a bath." And he says, "I'll alert the media." So good. No, what I loved, speaking of Hitchcock, that scene, before the train leaves the station. You've got Martin Balsam on the platform, and you've got the shifty Anthony Perkins, aka Anthony Perkins, up on the stairs of the train, like getting on, and Martin Balsam is down at the bottom. And I was thinking, yeah, the last time they saw each other on film, Perkins was at the top of the stairs.
Yes, he was. Well, that's not the only Psycho reference. Did you ever check the other things? With
the whole thing about the mother, yeah.
I'm like sitting here going, okay, the screenwriters are just having fun. They're like, okay, we cast Anthony Perkins, and so which of these characters has mommy issues? Anthony Perkins McQueen has mommy issues. Like literally, like this is totally if Bates Norman got away with it and he decided to do a cover with his name McQueen and get on this train and work for this gangster. I could totally see how that would play out.
Mother on the Orient Express.
Mother. The minute he started talking about his mother, I'm like, okay, no, that wasn't probably in the book. They just totally were like, no, we got Anthony Perkins in this. His character's gonna have mommy issues.
My roommate walked in as Perkins is creeping into the man's room with a knife, and he's like, "Oh, that guy holding a knife. That's real original." It's like, yeah, Anthony Perkins holding a knife. Yeah, I mean,
and then we have Sean Connery trying to hide his Scottish accent to being British. And I'm like, dude, you played Bond for a long time, but it escapes every so often, his accent.
Yeah, he can't hide his accent. He's so good at it. But you have, if you look over the cast, Lauren Bacall I don't believe was ever in a Hitchcock movie, but you have Anthony Perkins, of course, Psycho, Martin Balsam, Psycho, Ingrid Bergman, Spellbound and Under Capricorn, Sean Connery was in Marnie. Who else was in this cast that I'm just blanking on? It seems like Sidney Lumet may have gone out of his way to cast a lot of people because they were in Hitchcock movies, and I don't know if that's the case or if it just wound up being just a coincidence. But I just found it interesting watching this because I made a vow this year that I was going to watch every Hitchcock movie that I've never seen. So I've been watching a lot of them.
Nice.
Oh, John Gielgud was in
Yeah.
was in quite a few Hitchcock movies too. So yeah, I just wonder, like, was that intentional? Was that a Sidney Lumet intentionally casting Alfred Hitchcock regulars for this movie?
It could have been. I mean, this was an ostensibly suspense thriller type movie, so why not?
Yeah, why not get people who are used to doing it? Plus names. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, this cast, that's one of the more fascinating things is the people who show up in this film, even for the minor roles.
Yeah.
But what catches me with it, and I was looking at this one, my wife mentioned the music in the beginning, especially. She's like, she didn't care for the music, and I'm like, oh well, it got nominated for an Academy Award. She's like, what?
Bergman, I think, won the Academy Award for this.
She did. She's the only winner. They got 6 nominations, and that's what surprised the hell out of me because
wait, Ingrid Bergman won for this movie?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what surprised us both because we were discussing about it afterwards. And we're like, if anybody deserves an Oscar nomination, it's Lauren Bacall's character, Mrs. Hubbard. I loved her character.
I was, my problem with her was I was getting serious was it Aunt Martha vibes from Sleepaway Camp.
Oh, that's well, but that's later, so we don't have Aunt Martha yet.
I
So
thought you were gonna go Mommy Dearest vibes.
Or Mommy Dearest, there's that too.
There was that. Yeah, Lauren Bacall. I as far as I can remember, I've never seen her play a role where she was just this much of an asshole.
Yeah.
And Ingrid Bergman, though, she's played the kind of mousy woman a lot. But then again, the 2 times that Gaslight in this, she played a really mousy woman and won an Oscar. So maybe that's what they wanted her to do.
Well, I wonder if, and I hate to say it, and the Oscar discussion is a whole nother episode and conversation, but it makes me wonder because this was one of her last films. I'm wondering if this was more of, she got the Oscar for this role, but it was almost for her body of work more so than
maybe. And also, maybe the way, hey, listen, we kind of treated you kind of shitty the last 2 decades. So we're sorry. Here's another Oscar.
But
because the scandal about Ingrid Bergman nowadays, nobody would bat an eye at.
Yeah,
she slept around. Ooh.
It's a normal Saturday in Hollywood. What are you talking about?
She was just 40 years ahead of her time.
She was just. But I mean, out of the characters, I like Lauren Bacall's performance actually even more than Albert Finney. I think Albert Finney tries his best with this role. He did get nominated for Best Actor in this role, but he's definitely a different Poirot than the other ones that have been committed to film. But then again, this was the first time that someone had tried to tackle this material at all in cinema. This was the very first time. So, this is kind of one of those where we had kind of ensemble. We did have ensemble films before, but I think this was one of the first, ones that put that ensemble tag on the map that shows, yeah, look at the scope you could get, your cast in. And I don't know. I find a lot of charm in this film. I guess I don't take it that heavy. I almost take it more as a little bit of a, it sounds bad because there's people being killed in it, but a lighter film.
I always felt that way about these kinds of murder mysteries, though. Like, as compared to like a noir film from like the 40s or 50s, which were ostensibly darker, this is a very PG sanitized version of a murder mystery, and and I think that's kind of what they've kind of become now with like Rian Johnson doing these films. And I'm looking up right now. I want to see who actually won the Academy Award that year instead of Albert Finney, because I'm thinking 1974, Godfather 2 would have been nominated. I'll look it up and see what else. But yeah, I always kind of felt that way about these movies. I always kind of felt like they were kind of like the warm and fuzzy version of a murder mystery. Like the Agatha Christie stuff is kind of tamed. It does kind of, it feels kind of PG. Like they're not that dark. They're a little more light.
I'll disagree a bit there, at least in terms of this movie. The opening montage with the Armstrong kidnapping, with the music, just the kind of the reenactments along with the swirling newspaper. I've never been like creeped out by swirling newspaper effects, but this got me. Also, the revelation of Ratchet's body was very creepy, with like the blood trickle down the mouth, and the revelation that he'd been stabbed 12 times. You see the body, and then the flashback to that ritualistic scene of everyone kind of coming into the cabin under the blue lights and stuff. I mean, that is not family friendly, or it's
Yeah.
not graphic, but it's haunting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is I liked that scene a lot, but I just kept thinking they're not being that quiet.
Though if I remember correctly, he wasn't fully next to him. I think he was I think there was some space between him. It was kind of hard to
I think he was in the next cabin over,
judge.
but I mean, it's not like the door is not the door is not right next to the door. It's kind of like you
Right.
have an
There's some
apartment and there's
space,
like
yeah.
wall between the cabins. But
That's one thing I do give him credit for, and I can see why it got nominated for cinematography. Usually cinematography is like big, wide open, expansive, visual. The one thing I think that they do really well in here is capture the crampedness of an actual train, especially for back then. It's really claustrophobic. Even in the dining car, you're still really visually claustrophobic in this film, I think.
dude,
Well,
have you looked at the poster for this movie?
yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like there's so much going on there, just in terms of the graphic design, like with the train being the dagger and the white of the dagger, like representing the snow and all the people crammed it. It's gorgeous. And there are aspects of this movie that I love, and the way it looks is one of them. I mean, the train pulling out of the station, there's some great, hero shots, and you're kind of panning up to you're kind of like, why am I going up to this detail? And it's the headlamp turning on and nearly blinding me as it pulls out. It's really cool.
Well, with the camera work, they do try to establish the train as almost another character rather than just the setting. You could tell that because, like you said, the hero shot. We get how many angles of the train leaving the stage?
I mean, it's like Star Trek: The Motion Picture,
Right.
leaving the space dock.
I think what Lumet was going for was that old 1930s, late 20s, early 30s, early talkies. We're going to settle everything in the drawing room mystery that you'd see with like the 13th chair or any of the Charlie Chans or any of those movies. And I think that's what he wanted the film to kind of feel like. And those films do kind of feel claustrophobic for a different reason. So they had no money when they were shooting them, so they had to minimize their sets. But I looked up the Academy Awards that year, and Mark, you mentioned earlier you felt like Ingrid Bergman may have been given the Oscar for her body of work versus this performance. Art Carney was the winner for Harry and Tonto. And the nominees who did not win were Al Pacino for The Godfather Part 2, Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express, Dustin Hoffman for Lenny, and Jack Nicholson for Chinatown.
And who won for
Art Carney for Harry and Tonto, which out of those 5 movies...
See, folks, the Oscar controversy is nothing new. Oscar controversy has been out there since at least the 70s.
When's the last time anybody came up to you and said, hey, you know what movie you need to see? And it wasn't Godfather 2, Chinatown, Lenny, or Murder on the Orient Express. It was Harry and Tonto.
Wow.
I got to admit, this is making me want to see Harry and Tonto.
It makes you want to see Harry and Tonto now.
He beat Pacino in Godfather 2 and Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. What the fuck did he do in this movie?
How do you do that?
It's like the Green Book of 1974.
You want to even know the better thing about Harry and Tonto? It only got 2 nominations. It got nominated for Best Actor and Best Writing Original Screenplay. That was it. And of those 2, Art Carney won.
I mean, again, I get it. You want to give the guy his due because you never got a chance to, but wow, no! Out of those 5 performances, 4 of them people still talk about. It's not the winner.
Well, that's why they came with the Lifetime of Achievement Oscar, the
Yes.
honorary Oscars, so they didn't have to do that, right?
Oh wow! Although it still feels like they do it sometimes. Like
They do.
Scorsese should have gotten it way before The Departed. You
And,
know?
well, and I will go on a limb, and I'm sure I will get lambasted and thrown on a spit for, but I will say that Peter Jackson, Return of the King, got Best Picture nomination because of the body of work and just the amount of what they did for bringing the Lord of the Rings trilogy to the screen, more so than the film itself winning for Best Picture
I agree with that.
on its own. I will say it doesn't win Best Picture if it was a standalone film, and I know that sounds weird for part of a but if it's just the body of work, part of the reason that film won as what it did was because it was like, yeah, okay, you put in like 10 years of your life and made this very epic cinematic experience. Here's the Oscars. There you go. Okay, good job.
Right. It was almost like just an Oscar for the Lord of the Rings, like the
Right.
entire
Yeah,
trilogy wrapped up in
exactly.
one. Yeah.
You know, and bringing it back around to here, I think Ingrid Bergman got the Oscar for this because even in this, like I said, there's a number of other, performances out here that I think stand out at least a little bit better than Ingrid. She's playing the mousy character, but her character out of all of them, I'm just like, couldn't her character die? I mean, her character was just not, not the greatest out of the other characters that really stood out. We talked about cinematography though in that train scene. For 74, I give them props. And again, we had the discussion afterwards of them trying to show at least a little more diversity in the train station than what you might maybe not the best, but they tried though. It's not the best, but they tried. It felt like they tried at least a little more to give it a more of a international flavor to it. Never mind all of the cast. I mean, was the snow whiter outside or inside? But outside of that, I think they were trying to at least give you an international flavor for where this film's taking place, so you knew it wasn't the U.S. because that's one thing too. It's on Murder on the Orient Express. It's not in the U.S., so especially back then and even today, it's hard to sell a film to American audiences that doesn't have some kind of tie to the U.S. In all honesty, for long.
Well, I mean, that's kind of fine. I mean, you look at other international markets; they're not necessarily knocking themselves out to say, hey, we're making a movie in China. We have to impress the Americans.
True. I
doesn't.
know.
Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying is that it's a tougher market. It's tougher to sell, not maybe so much nowadays, but especially in '74. I think that's why you have the American characters that you do in here that talk literally like they all came from Chi-Town. See, they're all from Chi-Town.
Yeah, I like the one guy, Mr. Hardman, and he says, "Call me." I go by Dick. I'm like, yeah, there you go. I also like there was one little detail, and I didn't go back to rewatch it. I just like to imagine it in my head canon. But before they get on the train, we see Connery and Vanessa Redgrave, kind of illicitly, stealing a kiss, and Poirot is up on this platform above them. And he sneezes, and I swear to God, his sneeze sounded like a cheat. Like he knew that they were, cheating on somebody.
See,
with
that
each
was
other.
that was a fun scene because I laughed. We laughed heartily at that scene where Poirot is sitting there with his escort, and the guys tried to either butter Poirot up or make him feel better. He's like, oh, this is the best. This is the best ferry on the Thames. Or he's like, have you ever rid on a ferry before? And the guy was like, no. It was just like,
yeah, they did that gag like 2 or 3 times, and it was cute. Yeah, I like that.
And they have some other gags as well. But if you compare Albert Finney's Poirot to the Poirot that really became famous, they're night and day, really. As far as this one's far more emotional, I think, and a little bit more animated than the others. And there are a few things, as I was told by the expert in the family, there were a number of choices that he did and things he did that she's just like, yeah, no, that wouldn't.
And I'm wondering now how much of that was for the sake of brevity,
Right.
because to properly tell Murder on the Orient Express, you'd probably have to make a miniseries to do it exactly like Agatha Christie wanted it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like what we were talking about before the show when you were talking about, Stephen King novels. Ian, you were talking about Carrie, Christine. And Stephen King always surprises me whenever they try to make any of his books into films, because they usually turn out rather different. One of the ones that held a little bit truer to it, though it was very bare bones, was Dark Half. The Dark Half was not actually a bad adaptation of Stephen King. I actually read books back in the day, folks. When I was a teenager, I was reading constantly. I read The Dark Half, and then The Dark Half came out, and that actually held pretty true to the book. But, with any murder mystery or mystery or whatnot, when you're reading the novel, you're also in your headspace. I think when you're reading that, you're piecing it together yourself. You're imagining this. How is this playing out? And maybe filling in some blanks. But when you get the movie, it's kind of presented to you there, and you take what's visually presented to you there. And if they don't give you all the details or they've cut things out, for time, sometimes, you lose that to wait. You're like, wait, how did you draw that line? And then when they explain it, you're like, no, but really, how'd you draw that?
Yeah, how did you come to that conclusion? How do you know this wasn't just...
Yeah, I mean, and I know it's Poirot, and that is his reputation, and that is kind of the gimmick of him piecing it together. But in the film, I think I see where you're coming from, Ian, is that it could have been handled maybe a little bit better visually, or presenting it to the audience a little bit better. I'm not for anyone holding an audience's hand, but at least establish a little bit more. The thing is, they play him a bit more bumbling throughout this film, especially when he's doing the interviews. He's a little bit more like Columbo than he is the Poirot from the BBC, which, don't get me wrong, I love Columbo. I think Columbos are a lot of fun, but he reminded me a bit more of him rather than the Poirot we've seen on like some of the BBC stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, I liked Finney's take on it. I have not seen the other interpretations of this character, so I have nothing to compare it to. I liked some of the other performances in the movie. I just don't quite like what it added up to, and it doesn't inspire me to watch the other adaptations, especially if it all kind of turns out the same way.
You don't want to see Alfred Molina as Poirot. I can't say that with a straight face.
With Kenneth Branagh, you get an origin story for the mustache.
Yeah, that shows up in Death of the Nile.
When it gets to a certain point, I was thinking about during one of the many, many, many long-winded speeches that are in this movie, I kept thinking back to The Usual Suspects. Because that is a movie that kind of unfolds where you're not even sure what the mystery is that you're watching. You're caught up in these kind of like various little heist plots. And it's not until the very end that you realize that Kaiser Soze has been essentially looking at a bulletin board with pictures and clippings and stuff and making up this entire story to help him get out of this situation.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of thing that I like, because it's not so much his wits and things that he has to, remember and pull out of his ass. He's just making stuff up as he goes along, and there's a spontaneity to it once you stand back and look at the whole picture. This movie, I was just so zoned out when people were, going on and on and on talking, much like I am right now, that I was like, just tell me who killed this person. I don't care anymore. Just tell me who did it so I can move on.
I will grant you that there was a lot of speechifying in this movie. There was a lot of just like the climax is 35 minutes of Poirot explaining what happened. So I totally get that. I totally get why anybody would dislike or not, or feel this movie doesn't live up to expectations because of that. I absolutely get it.
Yeah. Again, when it was made though, too, I think that was partly budget choices too, possibly at the time. I mean, when all else fails, throw the exposition in, right, Joe?
Well, I mean, when you spend your entire budget on the cast,
right,
you forget that
exactly.
you still have a movie to make.
Right. And that's the one thing is you look at this cast and you go, that budget, most of it had to go to here because
It
even
was
when you
all above the line. All of it. There's like 10 cents left at the end of it.
I mean, even Michael York and Sean Connery, who were newer, probably weren't exactly cheap either.
No, especially not Connery. It was, just being Bond and one of the biggest stars on the planet.
Well, it's funny is if you ever read the book on the making of Highlander, you get an idea real quick of what type of person Connery was and the reputation he had for making films. I think they shot all his scenes in Murder on the Orient Express in like 2 days because you only get him for a certain amount. And if he goes over that amount, then he starts charging you per dia, like per day.
Yeah,
that's what happened on Highlander. Is they said they only had him for like 2 weeks, and they had to do reshoots after those 2 weeks, so they had to pay a chunk of change in order to bring him back for a day or to keep him there. That's what it was. Weather shut one down, so they had to keep him. And also, I mean, with this collection of cast, it couldn't have been exactly the easiest to direct. In all honesty,
probably not.
The sheer egos, I'm surprised all fit into one room.
I would watch a making of documentary on this movie if one ever surfaced. That'd be fun to watch.
Yeah, but I mean, I find entertainment with it. I could see why it's talked about a lot. I could also see the issues that you have with it. I took it as it is, and I love movies like this, especially with ensemble casts, just because I like to see. It's always fun watching like very talented folks, especially collection like this, interact with one another and having fun while doing it. Like I said, Lauren Bacall, as much as you might feel about her character or whatnot, she's having a blast in this role.
Yeah. She gets to let loose.
she is just, it's like they didn't even direct her. They said, okay, here's your character. Here's your lines. Just go with whatever you do, Lauren. We're just going to go with it.
This was the time period where you'd get a lot of these ensemble pieces. And I think this was the same year as the Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
And you started getting like, you got like these, like this was the beginning of these like massive. Well, there were some before. This is like the big like massive murder mystery with like an ensemble cast. And you started getting all the disaster movies with like the ensemble casts. So this was that time period where you started getting a lot of those, and it was they're kind of fun just for like stargazing. Like a lot of them aren't necessarily very good, but you just watch them to watch. Say Fred Astaire and Charlton Heston chew the scenery.
Yeah,
you're not watching them for like this great dramatic value. I feel like this one made an attempt to have a little bit more dramatic value. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, I like it more for an ensemble piece than I do as a mystery.
Yeah, I'd be there too. As I enjoy seeing all the familiar faces and getting to see them all on one screen. For especially a film lover, you dig that sort of thing because you're wondering how is this going to play out? Who's gonna eat up the scenery and who's going to step back and let them? you know, and sometimes it's a surprise of who does what.
I'm kind of, I don't necessarily like these kinds of movies, honestly, where it's more about we got a big name cast, and isn't it amazing that all of these famous actors are in the same movie together? How do we bring it together? The answer is bucket loads of money. And we tend to get into these situations where they aren't compelled to act. They're not compelled to remind people of why they are great actors and not just movie stars. With a couple of exceptions here, like Gielgud's always great. I think Anthony Perkins does some interesting work as McQueen. But if you didn't have any, like, I can imagine a Zennial watching this movie and being like, what's the fucking big deal? Because
Yeah.
like, you could tell them, oh, but it's Ingrid Bergman. Who?
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
give a shit.
She was nominated for this role. Why? She was in the movie for 10 minutes and she kind of sucked. That's that kind of thing where it's like, I don't fall for it. If you give me an ensemble cast and they are actually acting circles around each other and not just chewing up scenery, that's impressive. This is just, it's a great poster. I was reminded of the better version of this movie, I think, and so I was looking it up here because I'd forgotten the title. It's a film that came out in 2014 called Wild Tales. And it's a collection of kind of like short films all centered around like different aspects of kind of human tragedy. And the opening segment is called Pasternak. And it's two people on an airplane and they're talking about this. They find out that they know each other because they knew this one pathetic character named Pasternak. And someone overhears them and says, oh, I knew that guy. He was a real loser. And the other person's like, yeah, I cheated on that guy. And someone else is like, yeah, I used to beat him up in school. And gradually, this conversation makes its way around this passenger plane, almost like a virus, and people come to realize they all know this guy, Gabriel Pasternak, and they all, treated him like crap. Turns out he orchestrated this as a suicide mission. He's flying the plane and he crashes it into his parents' house and kills everybody on board. And that's the cold open to this movie. I was like, yeah, that's the kind of, that is almost this story where this complete group of strangers comes to find out they're all connected somehow. We don't quite know that at the beginning, but they do. But it's a mystery to us. But it takes us 2 hours and 10 minutes to get to the end where it's like they're all kind of shitty people who do a shitty thing and they get away with it and everyone's supposed to be happy.
Well, because they do it to a shittier person.
Right.
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly, and that's the biggest problem. Like, I'm looking at that guy, I'm like, yeah, he doesn't even look like a really bad businessman. He looks like an overworked, kind of a shitty boss, but that's not reason enough to bump him off. You tell me that he killed someone, like, all right, maybe. I still want to see some evidence in a court of law and not a bunch of random people on a train.
If he would have something where maybe like it made it absolutely clear that he was the person who killed this little girl, then yeah, maybe would that work for you a little better then?
It would, or some indication that he's done other similarly dastardly things.
Instead of just taking the people's word for it.
Right, because there's nothing else about him that screams like, yes, also on my resume of terrible things is kidnapping and murder or whatever it is. It's like, he just seemed like, regular stuff suit businessman from 1935. I don't know.
It might be this way it stumbles at the end. It makes me wonder, and I didn't get a chance to talk further with the wife on it, but makes me wonder further if they leave it a little bit more of an enigma at the end of the book, so it leaves you questioning, like Poirot, excuse me, if he was actually the person. But in the movie, they give you a more definite. It makes me wonder if in the book they leave it more of an enigma. Because in the movie, they want you pretty much to assume that these people are in the up and up, because Poirot at one point says, oh, these people weren't expecting me on the train, therefore they didn't have a chance to come up with lies and corroborate their story. And that's his setup. That's where the setup is of where you're supposed to be taking what these people say to be true, because they didn't have time to come up with a story, which is what Poirot drops just before he really gets into the meat and potatoes of the murder and what actually happened near the end. Again, I'm not saying it was the best choice. I'm just saying I think that's what maybe that they were going for, whereas the book might leave it as an enigma going, well, was the guy they killed actually a bad guy or just a bad business guy? And leave it for you to decide whether or not everybody should get arrested or not. But again, I didn't read the book, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But it just makes me wonder if they felt the need to give it a bookend in the movie. Like, the audience needs this. You can't leave it open-ended. Whereas later on in movies, they're like, oh yeah, no, we'll leave it open-ended. You could figure out if that top actually moved or not. Ha! Anyway.
I do want to bring up one other thing though, because that he liked Anthony Perkins and thought Anthony Perkins really gave it his all here. I recently looked into a movie that I've never seen, and I had heard apparently Ryan Johnson loves it and thinks it's one of the films that made him or that inspired him to do The Glass Onion.
Does it subvert expectations?
The Last of Sheila. I don't know. I haven't seen it. It's out of stock on Amazon, but I ordered it. It will arrive eventually.
What's it called?
The Last of Sheila. And apparently Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim wrote it. Because apparently Anthony Perkins loved these whodunits. He was a huge fan of like Agatha Christie and stuff like that, which might be why you felt his performance was a little bit more genuine than everybody else, who maybe if you watch it now, you might feel they were people just collecting a paycheck. I don't know if I'd necessarily agree with that on all cases, but I think
some of them were there because they were asked, and especially with the older actors, they're like, "Oh, hey, a Hollywood movie still wants me." So
that's true too. Because at this point, I think not Rossellini, Bergman, I think was already. I think she was already back in Italy. I think she was in Italy at this point.
Right.
I don't think she was doing too much American cinema, which is also why I feel like why they gave her the Oscar, because it's like, hey, we kind of chased you out of town, so we're sorry.
And I will say, whoever the is the concierge, the head conductor, is probably is my unsung hero in this. The guy who knows every language in the book. I loved that part where different people from different countries are getting on the train, and he just greets them all in their natural, like he like knows who these people are, knows what language, and he greets them in it. And I'm just like, okay, that guy right there, that guy's like the star right there. He knows it all.
Oh yeah, he was great.
Yeah, and he ends up being connected as well. It's one of those things where everybody was connected to the Armstrong case in some way, shape, or form. Which, you know, that does kind of happen in even earlier mysteries and later on for sure, to where you kind of got to hang your hat and go, okay, because you're like, wait, everybody, even the cook was connected, you know.
If you really look at Clue, you know, Clue, the final ending
jokes at it, yeah.
Everybody did it. Everybody, and even the idea of having multiple scenarios was redone in Clue, because Poirot goes, "Oh, there's two scenarios here. One, and don't necessarily disregard it." And the other thing I just realized is the setup here is the same setup as The Glass Onion, where everyone's getting together, and the world's greatest detective shows up, and it's like, wait a second. You were never invited.
Yep.
Why are you here?
So Clue and both Glass Onion. I got that with Glass Onion right away too. You know, and even Knives Out. Some of those films, they're poking fun or bringing to light the tropes of those murder mysteries that may have taken themselves a little bit too seriously. I don't think this one took itself a bit too seriously, though. It does feel like they're trying really hard to go, give us those nominations. Look at all the stars I have in here. We're like, yeah, we'll give you 6 and you win 1 for the one role that.
Does this get a best nomination or no? Probably not.
No, I don't think it did. I think I pulled it up here. Best actress, best actor, writing, cinematography, costume, and original music, which I wasn't exactly impressed with the score to this movie, in all honesty.
Best picture that year was Godfather 2, which was the winner. Chinatown, Lenny, The Conversation, and The Towering Inferno.
Not Harry and Tonto or whatever. Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, wow, that's a list, especially Godfather 2, Chinatown, and The Conversation.
Yeah,
that is some tough competition for 1 year. All 3 of those are considered like all-time classics now.
Yeah, and there's a Tonto movie apparently.
Harry and Tonto, which one?
Harry and Tonto.
By the way, if you guys were curious as to who Ingrid Bergman beats out, Diane Ladd for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Madeline Kahn for Blazing Saddles, Talia Shire for The Godfather Part 2, and Valentina Cortez for Day for Night.
So yeah, that Oscar they gave Ingrid Bergman was a sympathy Oscar. Because again, don't get me wrong, I like her character in this. When I saw that she won for it, it surprises me because out of all the performances and all the talent and everybody you have on the train and everything, she's the only one that got nominated and won, off of this whole cast. And it's like, I didn't quite care for her character or at all. It's she's kind of like, okay, it's like
that is a rough year though. If you were in anything, but one of the Godfather 3 got 3 nominations for Best Supporting Actor. So.
Jeez.
Wow. Yeah, De Niro, Strasberg, and Gazzo.
All 3 were in that same category. Wow, that's
Gazzo for Frankie Pentangeli, Lee Strasberg for Hyman Roth, and Robert De Niro for Young Vito.
Wow.
And then, Fred Astaire and Jeff Bridges were the other 2.
Wow.
Fred Astaire for Towering Inferno and Jeff Bridges for Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
Wow.
But that is an interesting year.
that is a bizarre year. It's like, but there you have it, folks. Murder on the Orient Express. Whether or not you want to take the e-ticket with us and ride with it again, we'll find out here from our guests. Your final thought: is it worth getting a ticket to ride Murder on the Orient Express 1974? Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't care for the movie, but there's just enough in it for me to recommend. I think it was just kind of overall frustrating for reasons both cinematic and personal. So yeah, check it out. Why not? There you go. That's my ringing. That's my full quote. Check it out. Why not?
That's your full quote right there. That's going on the poster.
Doesn't live up to the expectations because you've probably like me, you've probably heard about this movie for decades as like this great whodunit, and then when you finally watched it, you said it was a couple months ago. It didn't really work for you.
No, I watched it couple like yesterday and today. I split up a couple.
Okay.
But the thing is, like, I'd mostly heard about the story, not so much this film adaptation. And I knew about the Branagh thing from a few years ago. It makes me interested to read the novel more than anything else for the reasons that we've talked about. Like there tends to be a lot, they say the book's always better than the movie. I'm tending to agree. And the more I read books and watch the adaptations, I kind of don't want to watch movies that are based on books anymore.
See, that's why I don't read. That way I'm not disappointed. See?
Right, but that's the thing. It's like, why deprive yourself of the purest form of the art?
Sorry, I do read.
I mean,
see, that says Mexican mudslide on my bottle, so I can read.
I mean, I've read Frankenstein, and the Universal movies are nothing like it. But at the same time, I like those, or I love those, and I love the novel. So I don't feel like.
Well, I'm not saying I'm saying that there are way more rules than exceptions.
Oh, definitely.
When it comes to that. It's just like, and maybe there's a cutoff. I don't know. It's just that when I watch modern adaptations of books, they're just, there's like, no, I got a much richer experience. Even though the book takes a lot longer to read in most cases, I feel like the movies are a bigger waste of time.
It's because you're a book nerd. No,
well, it's because the movies are made as like a digest version in a way.
Yeah.
Like I was when I first moved out here in 2014, I got a gig to adapt somebody's novel into a screenplay, and it took me about a year or so to get it right to where they wanted it. But I remember they were constantly frustrated with, well, we left out this part. I'm like, the screenplay's 125 pages as it is. Like, I get it that you wanted to, you want everything, but like we can't do your entire, if we want everything in your novel to be in the screenplay, we would be writing like an epic 4, 5, 6 hour movie. Right. So I think that's why ultimately it's almost always going to be disappointing, because if you read the novel, you have every bit of information about that story that you can get, because there's no set idea to how long a novel needs to be. With a movie, this was 2 hours and 10 minutes, and even that was probably the studio going, all right, fine, we'll let it go, but we got to try to get it under 2 hours, so we got to get more screenings in a day.
Yeah, I have a feeling because we're talking about back when you had single screen theaters, so that really did come into play. People may not realize it into your runtime, because you only got so many theaters with single screens, so you want to fit as many viewings as possible. And yeah, I imagine there's some things on the cutting room floor with this film. I wouldn't doubt it for sure.
Probably even before it went to screen, there were probably things out of the screenplay, because the studio was like, no, we're not shooting a 175-page Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
So that's probably why it was like, okay, let's just do these exposition dumps, because we got to get through this.
Well, I mean, you have massive experience, more so than any of us here, but you are a guru at it. But you always hear the stories of, the script that they start with is never the script that actually makes it to screen. Usually, it happened with Pray for the Devil. Pray for the Devil has some wonderful extras on the disc I reviewed. One of them is getting the principal character actors from the movie and having them read the first draft of the film. Screenplay. Wow. It's different, and it's fun watching them realize that it's how different it is. So because even the writer said, what we put to screen was not what was in the original draft.
I have no doubt that that's exactly what it was too. Yeah.
So, I mean, what about you, Joe? Would you recommend someone taking a ticket and riding the train of the Murder of the Orient Express?
Yeah, if you're a cinema nerd like me, then yes, because you're just going to get a kick out of, like Mark and I were saying, you're going to get a kick out of seeing Ingrid Bergman and Lauren Bacall and Martin Balsam and John Gielgud and all these people in these like this kind of later role in this kind of ensemble cast that's just full of stars. So yeah, if you're approaching it from that angle, then yes, definitely. If you're a casual moviegoer in 2023, I don't know that you would like this.
Mm-hmm. It's watch Glass Onion instead. Okay, very similar film, but it's more modern edited. It's more modernly written. Not just the subject matter, just the approach of the material is handled far more modern and what you're probably used to as a modern film goer than this film is. The 70s in general have a lot of decent but slow films compared to today. If you watch, a number of them have exposition dumps. The 70s is a really weird period of film.
Yeah.
I mean, you get horror movies we talked about earlier where at the end of this film, everybody gets away with the murder and you get this happy kind of bouncy music. There are horror movies that have some pretty disturbing things in them that start off with main title music that sounds like some airy 70s meditation album with a choir or a flute or something, and the next thing the
Last House on the Left, I'm looking at you.
or even I Spit on Your Grave. You watch I Spit on Your Grave, the opening, the music's kind of like this late 70s like easy listening music you're used to, and then like 15 minutes later the main character is getting gang raped multiple times in the swamp. So I mean, the 70s was a weird
by the way, I went into Walmart the other day. They have a special Valentine's Day edition of I Spit on Your Grave with a special Valentine's Day slipcover on the shelf, and I was like, this is so tone deaf. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
That picture was great. And you know what? I went to my Walmart. That is a corporate directed display. That wasn't just like the store doing their own thing. That is the display. They've got that. They got Let the Right One In with a special Valentine's screen cover.
Instinct, Rosemary's Baby.
My Bloody Valentine has a special Valentine's Day slip cover on it, and it says "The Things You Do for Love" at the top. And then in the upper left corner, they have your Titanic, they have your romance, The Notebook, in that a special Valentine's Day slip covers. But they got like 4 actual romance film titles, and the rest are all like horror
and erotic thrillers, like What Lies Beneath. Yeah. But the ones that stood out to me were Basic Instinct, American Psycho, I Spit on Your Grave, and Rosemary's Baby. I'm like, Rosemary's Baby, that romantic classic where Satan rapes your wife.
Right.
I got to go to Walmart tomorrow.
You got it.
I'm kicking myself in the ass for not buying all of them the other day. Even though I have all of them, I'm just like, I just want them for the Valentine's Day slipcovers.
Well, and those slipcover ones are like on the cheap too. They're like $5 or so. They're like $5. So you're almost like, I almost want this just so that on my shelf. You go, gee, honey, what romantic film? This looks like a romantic film. Sure.
I'm just thinking about the poor sap who grabs a copy of I Spit on Your Grave and decides he's going to watch that with his Valentine's Day date.
Oh, it's
in the Valentine's Day display at Walmart, honey. Let's throw this on.
It was in the Valentine's Day section, you know.
They can draw a nice romantic bath later.
Woo, and there you have it.
They're like $5 each when you go to Walmart. Yeah. Go look for the Valentine's Day display and laugh your ass off at it.
Yeah,
it's so tone deaf.
It is something to witness. You have to witness it because you're just like, there was someone who decided this was a good idea. Like they came up with the plan with the chart of where you're going to put the movies because every Walmart's the same, which means someone had to give actual thought to, well, I'm going to put I Spit on Your Grave and American Psycho next to The Notebook and Titanic. It wait,
with special Valentine's Day artwork.
Yes.
That's the part that just makes my heart warm.
Yeah. Well, what makes my heart warm is the fact we get to do these episodes, folks, and have wonderful crew members like yourself, and of course the fine folks who tuned into our long stream tonight. So yeah, the e-ticket. Grab an e-ticket if you're into classic cinema and haven't put this one on your radar yet. Watch it at least for all the familiar faces and some of the performances, but it does show its age a bit as far as its approach to the material. And so now this is a place where I give my crew members the license to shill. So Joe, please, license to shill whatever you want. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, Dave Canfield, who I've worked with a couple of other times, he and Paul Komicki made another film together. And it just now premiered on Tubi, and it is called Fortress of Sin. Go check that out. I'm going to be on the literary license podcast again this week and the following 2 weeks. This week we're covering 4 episodes of Batman the Animated Series. Next week we're doing the Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane and Alice Sweet Alice, and we're going to cap off the month by doing the original Full Moon Stuart Gordon version of Castle Freak and the recent remake.
Ooh, wow. Nice. That's a good lineup. And Mr. Ian Simmons, license to shill is yours, sir.
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also on YouTube, where Thursday night at 8:30 p.m. Central, be hosting a roundtable review of Megan, the big Blumhouse hit. It's about a week later. People have time to go see it and digest it. We're going to talk about it. So yeah, join us then.
I'm going to try to make it on there, and we may have a role reversal on that episode that of opinions of the way it rolls out usually.
All right,
but we'll see what happens. As far as my part, you know all the links, folks. Specialmarkproductions.com. I thank you for listening to our podcast. It is very humbled that we're going 10 years strong, and we're continually growing in listeners. We appreciate everybody and the support, everyone who tuned in. Infobomb, one last clue for the evening. He put Connery was Bond on the Orient Express on screen previously in Russia with Love. So yeah, he was familiar with the murder on the Orient Express. Well, on the Orient Express anyway, and murder. There you go. So, thank you so much, folks. And now we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.